With David Weinstein, attorney and former federal prosecutor. David, thanks for being with us. We have a lot to unpack here. First, I would just love your top line thoughts and reaction to yesterday's turn of events.
Well, I'm not surprised that the judge didn't just rubber stamp this. That's not her job. She can reject or accept any plea agreement that's presented to her. But the fact of the matter is, they should have ironed out this immunity issue, what was covered, what was being promised to him before they stepped into the courtroom. They've had time to do this amongst themselves. Now is not the time to do this. And if he thought he was getting immunity, then they should have cleared that up before he even stepped into the courtroom.
How unusual is that? You bring up a good point, because at the root of this issue is that there was a disagreement with the scope of immunity that this plea deal offered to Hunter Biden. How unusual is it that both sides didn't figure that out and have that locked in before arriving to the Delaware courthouse yesterday?
Well, Mark, it's very unusual. I mean, quite frankly, on both sides of the equation, if you're going to resolve something with a global plea deal, and that's what this was, it wasn't just the tax charges, but it was the gun charge and potentially some other investigations that are ongoing. If I'm representing a client, I want to know exactly what my client is getting immunity for. And if they're not promising me immunity outside of these charges, then I need to know that up front, because potentially I might not be willing to enter into this deal. So that's something they should have discussed and nailed down before they walked into that courtroom.
Yeah. I think a lot of people were scratching their heads over that fact. How did we not figure this out beforehand? So the judge said come back in 30 days. She also questioned the constitutionality of the agreement, specifically that diversion clause for the gun charge and the immunity Hunter Biden would receive. Was this plea agreement unconstitutional from the start, do you think?
I haven't seen the agreement, so I can't tell you what part of it would have been constitutional, unconstitutional, but based on her statements, it appears that she had an issue being the final arbiter of whether or not he complied with the diversion agreement. In diversion agreements, which are rare outside of corporate defendants, it's generally up to the government to decide whether or not you've complied with the diversion agreement, and not up to the judge. If he was put on probation, then it would be up to the judge to decide whether or not he violated probation, and they'd have a full-blown hearing, and there'd be adversary proceedings, and there'd be due process. But it seems to me that she was questioning part of the diversion agreement where it sort of said it's up to the judge whether or not you violated the terms of the agreement. If they can straighten that out and fix that and then decide what he's getting immunity for, then I think they'll have a deal when they come back in 30 days.
Okay. And let's also fast forward to not only 30 days, but to next week. Hunter Biden's former business partner is set to testify behind closed doors before a House panel next week. That could add a whole new layer to this investigation. How do you think that could affect a new plea deal here in a month?
Well, you heard from the prosecutor that there was still an ongoing investigation. It's related to charges that are not necessarily coming from this particular district court. And so depending upon what testimony is heard behind closed doors, how much of that then is filtered to the U.S. Attorney's Office, either in the District of Columbia or to the Department of Justice itself, there might be some additional charges that they're going to look at, and then they'll have to factor that into whatever new deal they present when they come back into court in Delaware.
Yeah, it is the story that keeps growing new legs. David Weinstein, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.